Okay, I'm gonna just wait for everybody to get settled. So welcome everyone. Thanks for RSVPing and joining us tonight for this talk. We're waiting for one of our artists to get logged on, but we can go ahead and get started with introductions. So just before we get started, right now, if you're in the audience, you won't be able to unmute or turn your camera on until the very end when we'll open up for questions. So we'll be sharing some images on the screen and examples of work in the show and works by each artist. If you do have a question, you're able to put that in the chat and it'll come straight to me. And then at the end of the talk, if we have time for questions, I'll go through those and we'll get those answered for you guys. So welcome. This is the Ice Cream Social Space. I'll give you guys a little roundabout if you haven't been here in person. We have beautiful windows all around the space on all walls, so we get lots of beautiful light. It's an industrial building, so we've kind of played with that with this show and incorporated works into the storage cage. So there's a lot of interesting curation that we were able to do with layering works across from one another that maybe we'll get into tonight. So, and also my name is Jenn Cacciola, by the way. I'm the program director. I always forget to introduce myself. So I'm going to start off giving a little introduction to each artist. Let me just make sure, sorry, I think Tavia might be having trouble coming on the call. Okay, so she might be, she's, I think, fixing her connection, so she'll be on in a couple minutes. Okay, so let's start. I'm just going to give a brief bio of each artist, and then we're going to get into the work that they have in the show and try to get a wider view of their practice through the theme of tonight's discussion. So Ruth Jeyaveeran is an artist, designer, and educator based in Brooklyn, New York. Her work has been exhibited at various galleries throughout New York, including Field Projects, ABC No Rio, and the West Beth Gallery. And she's been awarded residencies at the Jentel Foundation, Napoule Art Foundation, Pata Studios, and Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Currently, she's an assistant professor of textile design at the Fashion Institute of Technology. She has also taught courses in textiles and fibers at Parsons School of Design. Patricia Miranda is an artist, curator, and founder of the Crit Lab and Map Space. She's been awarded residencies at iPark, Weir Farm, Vermont Studio Center, and JV Printmaking Studio, and grants from Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance, Anonymous Was a Woman, 2 Arts Westchester grants, and a year-long NEA grant working with homeless youth. Her work has been exhibited at Odetta Gallery, ABC No Rio, and Wave Hill in New York City, the gallery at UConn Avery Point, the Newport Museum of Art in Rhode Island, and the Belvedere Museum in Austria. Her solo exhibition at Garrison Art Center in Garrison, New York in the fall of 2021 was featured in the Brooklyn Rail. She has a solo exhibition opening April 2nd at the Jane Street Art Center in Saugerties, New York. Manju Shandler has had solo shows at the Pelham Art Center, Corte dell'Arte in Venice, Italy, Brown University's Sarah Doyle Gallery, the Hammond Museum, the Honfleur Gallery, the Governor's Island Art Fair, the Bergdorf Goodman Store Windows, and multiple group shows throughout the US, Amsterdam, Berlin, Tel Aviv, and Hong Kong. She regularly shows in her community of Brooklyn, New York. The National September 11th Memorial and Museum exhibited 850 paintings from Chandler's 3,000-piece painting installation, Gesture, in an exhibition honoring the 15th anniversary of this tragedy. She has a BA in Performing Visual Art from Bennington College from 1995. Tavia Sanza is an artist and educator based in Columbia, Missouri. Her work has been exhibited at galleries in Chicago, Kansas City, Cincinnati, and New York. Her large installation work was featured at the True False International Film Festival. She has received several awards, including the Verna Wolfkammer Art Doctoral Fellowship, Wingate University Fellows Scholarship, and a Merit Scholarship from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start us off with our images for tonight. Just give me a moment to screen share. Okay. So the theme of tonight's discussion that we found that best united all of the artists in this group was marks left throughout history, including heirlooms, themes of memory, craft, and the human hand. So first, we're just going to get a nice walkthrough of each of the pieces from each artist that's in the exhibition at Ice Cream Social. Maybe let's start with Ruth. Give us just the most important info, a little backdrop about the piece that you have installed here.
Yeah, so this is, the piece is titled What Came Before. I've installed it a couple times before it went into this space here in Ice Cream Social. What we're looking at is the first time I installed it, which was on a flat wall, but it was created to be modular and site specific. And I'm like constantly adding new pieces to it. And it's going to be installed again in the summer in a much bigger venue and area. So it's kind of a flexible piece. And it's really exploring the connection of objects in the material world. When I started working on it, I was really thinking about the idea of taxonomy. And that's why the first iteration of these soft sculptures are pinned to the wall, because I was thinking of, you know, when scientists and naturalists like pin specimens to a wall. But then I wanted to have this line connecting all of them. So the yarn connects them. And some of the forms are specific, some of them are ambiguous. And I wanted to create utilitarian objects, biomorphic objects, objects that reference the body, to kind of talk about how when time works on the body and nature, everything kind of gets whittled down to the same elements. So that's like one of the big themes in a lot of my work.
Awesome, thank you, Ruth. And this is a view, so I included this first view just because it is a little clearer so we can see the piece in detail. But as I mentioned, Ice Cream Social Space is a little wonky. So we have this rare opportunity to see works installed more directly in relation to one another, I would say. So this is an image of Ruth's piece installed. So she's the only artist that's on this wall that separates the large cage space from a smaller cage space. And the works are installed on either side of this cage fence, suspended at different heights, as they usually are on the wall. And this is a view from the other side, basically. So this is showing the small cage space, and then this is the larger one. Let's wait for that to pass. Okay, Patricia, walk us through your piece that's in the show, A Joyful Keening. I think you're muted. Hold on, there we go.
Okay, hi. Ruth, your work looks fabulous in the cage, I have to say.
Oh, thank you so much.
So hard to photograph, but
yeah,
really nice when you're walking amongst the floating pieces. Yeah.
Yeah, the translation is great. So this is a piece that is actually a very small version of what these pieces typically are and what will be in my show that opens on Saturday. This is lace that has been sent to me initially unbidden, unsolicited. People started sending me lace when they found that I was working with lace. And I'm dyeing it with cochineal, in this case, cochineal. I use a lot of dyes and pigments that have long cultural histories in particular. So this is cochineal, which I've been working with currently quite a bit in this particular whole series of works. So all of the lace in this piece is donated lace. And then there are these ex votos that I've made that are reference the kinds of ex votos that one would find that were used as kind of either a request or in gratitude or in devotion. And I'm particularly interested in the ones the bodily ones. So if you were ill or you had something wrong with, a part of your body, you might create one of these and use it that way, or in thanks and in memoriam. So they're sort of a little bit like mourning tapestries, if you will, MOUR. And so that's something that I'm very interested in. The idea of lace being this material that was historically made by women, something that was very related to work and labor in the home, in the domestic space, related to the labor of care that women do in the household. So that sort of invisible labor that is made visible by these things being put together on a much larger scale. So the ones in the Jane Street show, or one of them is 35 feet long. The others are a couple other ones that are 20 feet. So they're quite large. So that sort of invisible labor is made really present and really visible in the space.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna come back to Tavia's. I have to get her audio fixed, but let me move ahead to Manju. So Manju is actually not inside of the cage. It's just outside of it, so it has lots of walking space around it, but it's kind of in this strange communion with the two pieces that are on the walls on either side of the building. And I have some detail shots showing the different viewpoints of that. But Manju, can you walk us through this piece a little bit?
Sure. This piece is called The Colonization of Red Jungle Fowl, which is a kind of lofty name for a piece that's really about chickens and poultry and kind of the culture around this animal that is so useful to humans as food and protein, and looking at the cultural significance of that animal and kind of using it as a modern take on a fable. Kind of fables are moral tales that use animals as kind of this like stand-in for a morality tale. And I think that this is something like that. So it's looking at chickens as this resource that human beings found and domesticated and then exploited and mined and industrialized. So you can see parallels in slavery, you can see it in industrial agriculture, you can see it in a lot of different things, fossil fuel consumption, all kinds of stuff. So it's taking kind of this, like chicken art's kind of funny, right? But it's taking it and putting it like, making us think about something that's ubiquitous in our life, from chicken and eggs and how we use those as human beings to subsist.
Okay, thank you, Manju. Do I have another? Oh yeah, I had detail shots.
Okay,
I thought
great.
I did.
That's great. So you can see some of the details about it. I'm definitely thinking about like hens in particular as mothers, and you can see the eggs inside their nests, and they're sort of very focused on taking care of their offspring. That's sort of the side narrative of this work. The eggs and the nest and kind of the environment with the grass and the bicycle wheels are all new for the show. This is a project I've been working on for a few years. So the hens and the roosters were shown in different places before, and I think that I'll show some of the paintings that are part of this series as well.
Yeah, we have those later. Okay. Oh, I had more detail. I was just in love with these little guys. So I filled
I'm
those
glad,
up with
and it's
detail
a lot
shots.
to take in because they're actually super detailed.
Yeah,
it's one of those things you can see it from a distance, you don't quite understand exactly what it's like. So I'm glad that you've gone a little closer and you can see. I'm also interested in recycling materials, and I have found lace and all kinds of different objects going on in here. And
Yeah.
if you look at it closely, you can see the hand and how it's made and how it's sewn. A lot of it's sewn, some of it's. This is poly extruded styrene, which is like a industrial machine material that people use for sealant, for sealing spaces and gaps and stuff. But I've used it to fill gaps and stuff. But I was interested in that uncontrollable, controllable kind of massy, globular quality to it.
Yeah, it blooms.
Yeah, it's
so many times people were like, they didn't realize what the material was until they were super close, because it
right.
just, we never see it in this context.
Well, I'm interested in sort of taking things that are common and elevating them. And I think that it works. Like these, you can see in the rooster that the tail feathers and the claws are all made from toothpicks that I've, glued together and then wrapped with thread to make it sort of there. And they're beaded. The roosters are a little fancier than the chickens, as male birds are. And these are all like thousands of glass beads on its body.
Wild. And I think we'll get into the reuse of materials and things like that soon. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, there were so many different parts to
well, I'm glad you're showing that it's kind of big.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we have Tavia on, I'm gonna go back to Tavia's piece. All right, Tavia, take it away. So basically just give us a short intro, anything really important for us to know about this piece that's in the show, and then later on we'll delve into your practice and former pieces.
Yeah, where to start? This is the same piece that's been installed in a couple different locations, but it's the only version like this. So basically, this is a composite structure of a bunch of crochet and embroidery that is layered over itself and then cut apart after each installation. And then reassembled modularly. And then I just sort of add fresh material to kind of fuse it back together again. And so in this way, this piece is constantly in flux. And every time I install it in a location, I'm really taking into consideration the strengths and weaknesses of the space that I'm installing in. Obviously, I don't always have something that is as easy to and as flexible to install as a, chain link fence, which really allowed me a lot of fluidity and ability to work front and back. A lot of times when I do this, I'm really limited by how many handholds there are and how I have to use the weight either for or against the needs of the space. So this just allowed me to kind of do whatever I wanted, which is really a nice change. But yeah, it used to be only like a kind of colorful landscape amalgam, but it's been turning white over time. And I think the next version is going to be, I think it's my plan to have it turn gold and maybe brown next. I haven't fully landed on what the next color scheme is going to be. But yeah, each iteration is its own thing and unique and then lives only in the documentation after it's taken apart. But the material itself goes on to exist in a new location.
And so this is the view from outside the cage and then inside, and it was really lovely. So yeah, incorporating the space, it's even reaching up and just that one point touching the piping there, and then it winds across, so it's also in a really cool dialogue with the pieces next to it. Cool. Well, thank you guys. Let me move forward. So thinking over the theme, we came up with some subtopics. So the first idea I wanted to look into, looking at some previous works of each of you, is the idea of history in the work and proximity to history. I think in different ways, each of you guys are dealing with larger phenomena that happen in history, and events that happen in history, but you still manage to keep a very specific and touched and personal aspect to the way that you're approaching it, right? It doesn't read as like what someone might call poster art, right? Like there is a cause, there is a thesis, but it's not heavy-handed. It feels very connected to you as a person and to your hand. And so I want to start with this installation piece from 2014 by Patricia. Maybe you can give us a short intro to what you were doing with this piece. And if you can, like, speak to how that relates to this idea of like staying close to larger themes in history.
Yeah, it's kind of fun that, I didn't know which images that you went in and chose some images, so I'm responding. I kind of love that. Can you go to the next one, just because it's
the full view.
Yeah, I think a lot about how materials communicate content. They come with their own histories, their own whole narratives, their own stories, and interested in playing with that, not as kind of a shortcut to content, but as a way to explore content that I'm interested in. So this project was a part of a series of projects that I did, thinking of materials as witnesses through history. So this is, let's see if I can really give it a concise. This is a work that uses the oak gall, which is a wasp nest, which is one of the two most common inks made all throughout history, which is actually where the word ink, which comes from, the Latin word incostum, because it's an acidic ink. It's made from wasps' nests, and I've been sort of obsessed with this ink for many years, and thought of it as this witness because it has been used in writing all throughout history in lots of different places in the world, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a installation exploring the history of the destruction of libraries. I was interested in cultural violence and a way to think through that using a material as a kind of lens through which to explore it. So the scroll that you see is a 16-foot scroll exploring. I did a lot of research into libraries that were destroyed in war and conflict, not earthquakes or fire, but specifically war and conflict, going back to the Library of Alexandria. And so it's a 16-foot scroll, and it has the year, the place, and what was lost, and as far as we can tell in history, and how when a culture is when one wants to destroy a culture, one destroys the history. So so libraries are often targeted. So in Sarajevo, in the war in Sarajevo, the library was actually targeted because it would destroy the history of a culture. So there's on the right-hand side, you can see there's a shelf with lots of different kinds of oak galls from around the world. The scroll is this, again, 16-foot scroll. There's a separatory funnel in the middle with the iron gallic ink that I made that drips like about a drop every 30 seconds to create a new history on top of this kind of recorded history. And the drawings on the back are on a kosher vellum, which is a calfskin that's prepared for Torah, using the iron gallic ink, which is the ink that is used even today for writing Torah, with kind of, sort of scientific drawings of the oak gall and the oak wasp, et cetera, et cetera. And on the left-hand side are these small magnifiers, which if you go back to the first image, where I research, so you can see the drawings, and then in those magnifiers, you can see images. Obviously they're 20th century because we don't have photographs from, I think the earliest, like it was early 20th century, but anyway, these amazing photographs of libraries that were destroyed up through 2014. I had some from Iraq and places where the libraries were destroyed in conflict. This happens to be an amazing image of the Blitz in London, where, you can't really see in this picture, but there's no roof, there's no walls, it's just, but people are in there in the rubble,
Well, the sunlight, you kind of get a sense of it.
So so it was this way of kind of thinking through, using this material as a way to think through this history of library destruction, using the oak gall again as this witness.
Yeah, and you get the sense that the artist has touched this material, like there's a union through touch directly to the material, and then the redrawing of the source of that material. So everything is still processed through through
I
you.
made the ink from the wasp's nests. I did all the drawings and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, definitely.
Ruth, I included this work that's maybe more of like a direct reference to the systematic approach in your work, or the systematic elements of your work. And there's some like environmentalism happening. So you're dealing with these very broad themes, but yeah, could you walk us through how maybe its personal connection to you, and how you retain that personal connection?
Oh yeah, totally. I think that the wool, because all of my work I'm using wool as a starting point, literally, you know, in order to felt it, it's all about touch. It's, you know, the final stages, you're like rubbing the wool, you know, it's all about holding and handling it and creating this felt skin. So I think that always, just the material has like a primal and a spiritual element that it brings in. And to me, that represents, again, this work is maybe, yeah, a little bit more systematic, a little bit more prescribed. Like you know, I've worked as a designer for a long time. So this was more of a, in my mind, a less intuitive, more kind of thought out piece than some of my other work. But yeah, it's a part of a series exploring the interaction between natural and industrial elements in the world, that shifting relationship. And I think the materials in the process also speak to that theme, because it's, you know, I'm combining hand crafting techniques with digital and technology. So there's, you know, it's like hand felted and hand embroidered, but then there's laser engraving on there and digital embroidery. And the formula there is for carbonic acid, which is what happens when carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, you know, interacts with the ocean and creates the acidification of the ocean, and what bleaches the coral reefs and all of these issues we're having. So I think all my work really deals with our connection or lack of connection to nature. So this was, again, earlier work where I was really very specific about it. And I think now it's gotten it's kind of infused just in everything I do. But yeah, I think the material and the process speaks to the concept and the theme as well.
Yeah, and I think you can read that was the direction you were heading into. There seems to be like two very specific and separate planes of like all of the data laying on top and not really engaging, which, I mean, it's accurate. It's an accurate portrayal for like how most people think about climate change, right? It's like the data that's happening separately that not everyone knows how to engage with. And then there's the touch and the things that we live with and the materials we know in a different way. And like, I'm feeling the separation, especially.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think the layering is also really important to me in all my work. And here, just the layering of the techniques and the materials, and kind of that they're the contrast, but the blending, like the two things happening at the same time. It's kind of reflective of, yeah, just this kind of all these murky things that are happening in the back of our head about climate change that are always just kind of there that we live with. Yeah.
And Manju, I included this like crazy, I imagine labor intensive and time intensive work that you also get a sense of like intimate dedication with. So let me let you take over and kind of explain how this one came about and its relation to history, but also maybe personally.
So this is an artwork titled Gesture. I began it a few days after September 11th, 2001. And I just had this kind of crazy vision that I would make one painting for everyone who died in the World Trade Center and in Washington. And we had no idea how many people that was at that point, but I just kind of blindly started making art in response because I didn't really know what else to do. And over time, it grew into this piece titled Gesture, and it is about 3,000 paintings. And it is broken into 5 different colors. Here you can see yellow, pink, and red, but there's also black and white, which are not visible from this installation shot. And this was a solo show at the Pelham Art Center this past September for the 20th anniversary.
So how did you, so since each of them function as a portrait, maybe I already know some of the answer to this question, but how did you
talk about it?
What?
So they're not.
Oh, no, not that. So, I mean, well, I was going to ask,
Sure.
how did you, I guess, wrestle with such a widespread event in history? Like, how did you wrestle with the task of representing that?
You know, it took about 3 or 4 years to complete it. And I was pretty free with myself, I have to say. I mean, it was definitely a meditative and therapeutic practice. At the beginning, I was just drawing burning buildings and people falling down stairwells and things like that, like obsessively. And those images, I don't know, do you have more images of this piece or no?
I don't have any detailed ones of this, but they are on your website.
They
I
are
think
on
there's
my
a whole
website.
page
Yeah, I
that
mean,
shows a good spread of them.
the first
I'm sorry,
paintings
Dawn.
were really very raw. They're not particularly great paintings. They were just kind of more like paint on polyester film, which is the plastic that I use for this. It's like a clear plastic sheeting that you can work on both sides, so it gives some depth to the images. And over time, you know, I sort of began to heal and had some perspective on it. And I think that I became a little bit more, I don't know, I had a little more distance from it. And my responses were very much informed by the media. I mean, it was one of the most documented events in history. So I spent a lot of time looking at news representations and photographs of the event and incorporating a lot of that imagery into my work as well.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, there we go. And then I also included this. So this is part of the same project as the installation that's at Terrarium. But as you mentioned at the beginning when you were explaining this piece, there are larger like societal structures that it's critiquing and or commenting on. So there's a lot of like big systems and ideas that you're wrestling with. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that, how you work through, because I know for a lot of artists who want to speak on big topics, maybe it's just scary, right? Like, how do you get over the thought that you have something worthy to contribute, or how do you get started on a project like that?
You know, it was, can you see my cursor if I move it?
No, I can't see yours, but I'm glad to point. I think people can see mine.
In terms of how do you address something big, I'll tell you the way I got into this piece was, you know, I'm very much motivated by materials, and I found these cast rooster heads, and that was the starting point. I just thought they were, you know, grotesque and beautiful and really interesting objects. So I began making, the sculptures came first. But as I started to really dive deeper into thinking about, you know, what chickens and roosters, how they function in society, and I eat poultry, it just gave me a deeper introspection into sort of the patterns of how human beings act. And we are warlike, consumerist, race being an animal. Humans are, we just consume the planet, we take things over. So I've used a lot of these imageries of ships, and specifically of whaling is another fable that I've gone pretty deep with, thinking about whaling and using that as a comparison to fossil fuel consumption. So I took these images of these whaling ships, and this time I had them kind of pulling eggs on one side, and then I had them pulling, going with balloons on another. So there's like something fragile with these eggs and something also fragile with balloon dreams. That's the way I think of those images. And then on the top part of the images, I just have these very grand chickens and roosters, and then kind of fragile societies of birdhouses and nests and chicks. And then the other side is something more about like a death-like iteration of that. So this is meant to be a 3-part painting, obviously.
I think I have, so this one is also part of the same series, right?
Yeah, and I showed that more recently at AHA Gallery in Bushwick. And the first pieces were really kind of about a cockfight, which was an allegory at the time for me. It's when the presidential race was happening with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And I was I had no idea what was coming, but I was really tired of all the press and stuff. And I thought, like, oh, they're just sort of puffing up their feathers and battling and whatever. So that's the way I was thinking of it then. But well, you don't know what's coming, right?
Okay, and then Tavia. So I know there's sort of ecological themes, but I feel a much more like personal series of investigations in your work. If there are larger societal ones that you want to bring up, you can also do that, or I'd love to hear about the personal histories that you're trying to speak about in the work, but they're very large themes of like regeneration, death. I get a lot of death themes from the work, right? So again, like very large universal ideas. And so how, like, walk us through again the same question, basically how you approach that from a personal point in the work, or keep it specific.
So this piece that you're looking at is actually one piece. So you can sort of track where the traces of the previous versions are within the work. So the original object was the green one on the left, and then I cut it down the middle, flipped it around and fused it back together, and then grew the next pink and brown layer on top of that, cut it down the middle, flipped it around, fused it back together, grew the white piece on top of that, cut it up, flipped it around, and then started adding the gold and the blue. And this is part of a lot of my thesis research for my master's. And during that time, I was really interested in cultural material evolution, and how the stylistic markers of a time period are built upon the trends and styles that came before it. And so like everything that we are currently experiencing has roots in a previous time. So it becomes this sort of composite structure where everything is sort of like interwoven together and dependent on each other. Because I think the choices that are available to you at any given moment are largely dictated by the choices that you made in the past on a personal level, or that society made in the past on a more systemic level. And so I'm really looking at how you navigate your history in the process of building your future.
Mhm. A system like of rewriting and dismantling and okay. And then I included these detail shots so that we could see the dye that you use. Maybe you could also speak about the cochineal, the history of cochineal, and how it's interacting with the themes that are more personal in the work.
Yeah, I work primarily with dyes and pigments that have a long kind of established history in painting and books, and as opposed to textile. I didn't come up through a textile history. I came up through like sculpture and painting and stuff, and through material culture research. So I'm interested in materials that have been used in all these different ways that have traveled, like that have had huge impacts culturally. So cochineal is an insect that is indigenous to Mexico and Central and South America. It didn't exist anywhere else on the planet before the Spanish came to the Americas. And red is a very different, I mean, I could give you a really long history of the history of red dye, but there's a few insect dyes. There's lac and kermes, and those were used in the rest of the world. They were much more difficult to cultivate. And when the Spanish came to the Americas, they saw this red dye that was, you know, really plentiful and ubiquitous. And it was used by the Mesoamerican people for paint and for textile and also as currency. And so the Spanish took it back to Europe and were able to basically hide for, I don't know, 100 or 200 years the source of this dye. It helped keep Spain a great power, and is really in the beginning of modern globalization, not globalization as a whole, because we have the Silk Road before that, but a kind of very particular kind of modern globalization that comes from, particularly from colonialization. And so I'm very interested in that history, and so that's part of that the use of those materials. So like the oak gall, which is this material that's been used for writing all throughout history, the cochineal has this long history of impacting culture, the changes in interactions of culture, the ideas of conquest and all of that. So yeah, I think that these works, especially the textile works that I've been working on in the past 5 or 6 years, have very often been about a kind of both a sort of an ecological grief, a kind of cultural grief around these interactions, which are both powerful and full of sort of beauty as well as violence. And so, yeah, I think the cochineal is very tied up in that for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, the fact that it's lace too kind of dilutes that harsh, powerful red in some areas so that it's like more palatable. But then you get these clusters where it's tightly knitted that feel very fierce. And like I'm also looking at this one toward the bottom that's like looks like it was dyed and dyed and dyed and starts to look like blood soaked, right? So like there's a full gradient of like peaceful and joyful red all the way through to violent.
Yeah, I mean I don't I sort of am an intentionally sloppy dyer. I don't filter the dye out of I don't filter the dye stuff out of the vat. These things are dyed 3-4 times generally. It's that the material is very palpable on the surface. It has a strong smell. They kind of shed a little bit. I want that kind of viscerality to be really present in the work. And I think it's present, even the viscerality of the lace, which we think of as this delicate, kind of genteel thing, right? When it begins to be on this scale, it starts to take on that kind of the sort of labor, the invisible labor of that becomes reiterated again and again and again and becomes really visible. And it still is an aesthetic, an object that has an aesthetic, right? That has a kind of beauty. And I think those things are really tied up with one another. Beauty and
yeah. And there's something about like these individual things that were handmade then being generated, and like almost treated as a mass right? Like combined and then it becomes something else that maybe it wasn't supposed to originally, since it was supposed to exist as like a small handcraft.
Yeah, and I mean the lace was something that was an economy for women. It was generally made by women in the domestic space, but there would have been many, many, many women would have been employed to make a single lace object because of the sheer labor of it. So making that labor sort of visible in this is important. And then the other thing, of course, is that, you know, I started working with family lace. That's how I started working with Jentel at all. I have this family lace from my grandmother's, my Hermenegilda and Rebecca, and people started sending me lace, and without me asking, as I said before, and it just became this. I mean, I have currently boxes and boxes and boxes and bags of lace that I'm still unpacking, and for the show at Jane Street Art Center, we already have people bringing lace. So there's this, yeah, it's really amazing. So I realized that this was more than this kind of intimate, like the intimacy that I felt about these materials and about this process was much bigger. And so it turned into an archive. So I've documented every single piece of lace. I've documented a couple of thousand at least pieces of lace so far, and have an entire archive. Lacearchive.net is a website which is nowhere near updated with all of the lace that I've even documented, because it's actually a pretty large project. Everything is photographed and measured and documented before it goes into a project. So, and the people are, yeah, the names are on the website again, not, it's getting updated day by day. So yeah, it's turned into this idea of kind of, people wanting to have this material kept and remembered in some way, even though they themselves don't have a place for it or their family doesn't. I've gotten letters, I've gotten 6-page handwritten letters from people about the lace that their grandmother made and how, you know, how they've stored it and how it's came and how it's been stored and kept and passed on, how people hid, you know, this lace in World War II. I mean, these amazing stories that completely, you know, it's sort of, as an artist, you know, you show up, you pay attention to what shows up. You know, this kind of showed up at my door, and I was like, this is something that I really need to pay attention to. And this is a way of, you know, it's a way of honoring it, as well as, you know, creating this aesthetic object, you know, at the same time. So that's very interesting to me. And I think people feel really moved to think that the work, that this piece of lace that they've had in a closet that was made by a family member or stored for many years will get used in this way. That's been really interesting for me. You know, I wasn't sure if people would be okay with, you know, I'm going to dye this lace and then sew it, do all these things to it. And the response has been quite the opposite, you know, that it's a form of preservation, and that the idea of being part of the project is really meaningful for people. So yeah.
That the personal objects will be considered art. Yeah.
And live on in a, you know, in a different way.
Yeah. Thank you. So I wanted to bring up the ideas of like utility as a theme that I was seeing in some work. So like in Manju's piece, ideas of utility become like violent, right? The idea of living things having a utility. But that kind of relates a little bit to the repurposing of materials and like finding new uses for things. So maybe, I know you mentioned earlier the repurposing of certain materials, but I included the detail shots here and this wonderful like bike wheel moment that is made from this lampshade and the bike wheel on top that creates a little pedestal. Manju, maybe you can walk us through the detail shots here and like how you're imagining the repurposing of materials.
I mean,
and meaning.
The bicycle wheels were kind of again, it's some of it's intuitive and some of it is thoughtful. Like if I'm looking at chickens and poultry as fuel, then that is the fuel that makes a bicycle go, right? Because it's human powered. So that felt like a nice, you know, nod to that moment. And it also kind of had a functional and aesthetic purpose. It went with it and it elevated it so things would work on different elevations. And inside the lampshade, you can't quite see, but is a plate with all the eggs on it. All the eggs, there's 90 eggs in the shell.
Oh yeah, I think I had that.
There's a plate of eggs inside the lampshade. So there's a lot of different levels and things inside of things that I was interested in showing. And I'm a collector, clearly, of stuff. And I'm interested in sort of high and low objects. So there are some actual feathers in there. On the rooster that's on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see. So the sewn feathers are made from tulle, like that are in ballet costumes. And then there's glass beads and pins.
And these giant safety pins
the giant safety pins, which I found them somewhere. I can't remember. I think maybe they're like what you put on a kilt, but I somehow came across a bag of them. So I had them and I used them for this. And they became this kind of industrial feather type thing with the toothpicks and the thread and ostrich feathers and skewers. And these pieces of wood that actually I found in a hardware store that were cut on that beautiful angle. And then I gilded. Yeah.
And there's
it made sense to me.
Yeah, because there's this strange balance of things that are alluring and detailed. So you're pulled in and then you're met with these giant, sharp, unpinned safety pins and these skewers that are then also delicately gilded. So it's this back and forth of being entranced in this object and attracted to it for whatever use it has or just for the beauty. And then this feeling of being warmed, it feels, especially, I think the hens that are on the floor definitely have those couched bodies and they're more like receptacles to hold the eggs. And then the two roosters that are fighting, you really feel this explosion of aggressiveness and defensiveness just through the materials that are used.
Thank you. I'm glad that it's speaking to you and I hope it speaks to other people. I've had a lot of pleasure making this work. It's something that I've come back to, moved away from and come back to over the course of a few years because they are very labor intensive. And weird, and every so often someone wants to share them. So I'm happy expanding it each time I get to show it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you mentioned it during the talk tonight, but these are all the caging is from intertwined hangers, right? With the netting over the top.
Yes. That's true. And some of that was functional because I was trying different kinds, I had chicken wire. And I thought about that, but it just felt very pedestrian and kind of special enough. And I liked the more open weave, this kind of made netting with a much larger, more kind of tangled up way of doing it, more organic, felt better. And there are references to hangers in society and what hangers have been used for and good and and obvious for clothes, but in the not obvious too, which I think I don't know. That is a small thing because the roosters are men and
there's these little references, subtle references to violence, but overall it's still a very beautiful object.
Yeah, I mean, and I have a nest that I made. There's probably a picture of it somewhere, but I also have these gold plates, which I just found at the thrift shop when I was looking for the lampshade. I knew I wanted a lampshade, but then in the thrift store there were these gold plates, and I was like, oh, I like these too. I have 4 or so gold plates that a lot of the eggs are on too. So just to kind of in a subtle way, just be and this is food. Yeah.
I'm going to move us along a little quicker, but I pulled up this installation from a recent solo show at the Garrison Center that Patricia had for this wonderful interior image of this, what would you call it? It's like a little cave tent. It's this structure. I don't want to label it as anything. With this, I don't know. I'm probably blocking the images a little bit, so I'm going to move this across, but it has this wonderful little skylight. I just included this because it was a good transition into the discussion of materials and the relationship to the body that I want to talk about. I grabbed a quote from your site that I thought was a good starting off point. You said, "I'm interested in textile as a form that wraps our bodies from cradle to grave." So I thought we could all talk a little bit about fiber and maybe the relationship to the body. I know we've touched on it a little bit, but Patricia, was there anything in relationship to this piece that you wanted to mention quick? I know this is a different use of fiber here, so it's specifically clothing.
Well,
Inside this piece.
it's a mix. Yeah, inside is clothing. The outside is a combination of lace and linens that people have sent me, including skirts and aprons, and then also ones the wall pieces that you can see, one of those behind, is completely all donated stuff that people have sent me. This piece is a combination of that. And yeah, I started, I as I said, I didn't come up as a textile artist, and I was thinking about, I don't know, this is a little bit adjacent to what you're asking, but I think I was thinking about objects as kind of mourning objects. This idea of the things that are close to the body and things that stay around the body from birth to death, and that thing is textile, right? It's textile, is always there. And then that was sort of related to the lace and this idea of the labor of care that textile implies, and on and on. I could go on. And then I was also thinking about, the ability the idea of the monumental object, and as an artist in today's world, how did I feel about the monumental object, having come from like a sculptural and installation background, and I felt like the textile is this malleable, mutable thing, and can allow me to do these kind of monumental works that then fold up and are easy to transport. And so, and that have all of these notions of touch, and also are kind of somewhat have an ethereality to them, that
it kind of feels like it marks the absence of the body, these pieces on the inside.
Yeah, I think that the textile, yeah, that's true. Like all these textiles imply the body that's not present with them. So I think all of those things are tied up for me in this work, and this idea of an object that is not really permanent, like I'm interested in impermanence in objects in some way, that this work is sort of in some way fungible. It changes when it moves to another place. It kind of collapses. It opens up and closes. It has all of these things about it that I felt just were important to me at this moment. Yeah.
And it retains wrinkles of its previous position. So there's always like evidence. It records evidence more than other materials.
Yeah, these materials are all used, and none of them are new. And so they all have, and some of them more than others, have some evidence of the use. There are stains, there are tears. People will contact me and say, "Oh, I have this lace, but it's stained, or it's this or that." I'm like, "That's great, that's fine." I don't want you to. Someone sent me a thing and said, "Oh, I washed it, and now I feel terrible that I washed it." Like once they washed it, they realized they had, this is before they sent it to me, they realized that they had lost something in the washing. So yeah, I'm interested in that history. And also, again, in objects that have a kind of mutability and can have a small ecological footprint, even though they can be very large.
Yeah.
That's a little adjacent to your question about.
No, I think yeah, because I guess when I'm talking about the body, it doesn't have to mean the artist's body. you know,
And I think it's the body of, you know, the planet body also.
Yeah.
Thinking about the body in the intimate body, and then the communal body, and the cultural body, and then the planet body. You know, I think about those things as kind of interconnected in important ways.
Yeah. And I guess on this topic of fiber art, I want to make space for it in the conversation, although it's probably something all of you get asked so much. So I don't want to bore you in the audience, but the idea of the history of fiber being considered craft, and the idea of craft being separate from fine art, and the idea of women's work, is that I just want to create a moment here for any of you. Is that something that you do think about? Does that function in your practice? Or maybe it doesn't, and you're just doing what you need to do in the studio. But yeah, how does that kind of work its way in? So Ruth, you can answer whichever way you want, if you want to talk about fiber in the body, or if you want to make mention of this history of craft as well.
Sure. I mean, in terms of craft, I very purposefully like to say that I work at the intersection between art and craft and design, and I'm not very interested in making the distinction in terms of like a hierarchy. But I would say that I think maybe if Patricia was saying she dies badly, I felt badly. So I'm not actually, you know, I don't know if I'd really be accepted in a hardcore craft community, because I actually like to, obviously, to me, it's an act of controlled chaos, and I like to keep it incredibly loose and
gestural,
and work really intuitively, and use the wool as I mean, the material is, as a collaborator to me. I don't want to control it too much. So in terms of that, maybe there's a distinction between art and craft, but in general, I really purposefully do like to work in the intersection, but not make any sort of hierarchical decision about it. And I like working in this tradition that's, you know, existed since the 60s of you know, women, quote unquote, women's work or craft traditions, you know, coming into unconventional spaces or recontextualizing them. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not a new idea, but I think it's still somehow seems cutting edge sometimes. Yeah, strangely. It's very strange when you think about this, but and then just the way things come back around, like the trends in the art world, and you know, I know textiles and fibers are having some moment. So
they're having a moment right now.
They're having a moment.
They definitely are.
But in terms of the material and the body, I mean, I think the process is really, I already stated, it really involves, personally, it involves my body, not just in terms of handling the wool, but it's a very physical process, which is super important to me, because it is a therapeutic, there's a therapeutic aspect to the making. And I think, I guess I'd already said it, but, you know, felting, again, to me is the way I do it, but also just the process is controlled chaos. It's like these fibers are tangling together and actually creating something. And I think that is very reflective of our relationship to the world, the natural world, and to our bodies, and how sometimes we have this uneasy relationship with both, or with our bodies, or denying certain parts of our bodies, or the corporeality of our flesh and our being. So I'm interested in tapping into that, and I think it's kind of a no-brainer to use felt to you know, show like kind of fleshy corporeal things, because it has that quality. So so I think it all kind of plays together really well. Yeah.
And there are these moments, like I can't think of the word you just used, but the knotting and the interweaving, like there are these moments that feel like direct impact And then there are these moments where you can kind of like forget you're in a body,
Mhm,
especially like in the digital age, if we want to bring that up, right? There are moments that like now there's a little bit, it feels like there's more segmentation. There are moments when you feel yourself in a body, but there's also parts of your day when you can just kind of feel like you're not,
mhm.
like you don't have that direct connection to the physical space around you.
Yeah, and I think bringing it back to what Patricia was talking about the tactility of the material, also that it's on our bodies, that we're wrapped in it, and that is another way I think to reconnect with that side, which we're constantly kind of feeling disembodied, like you're saying, especially right now. So I think that's another way that material connection is important.
I think I'm gonna skip ahead to Tavia's detail shots. Yeah, okay. This is like primetime materiality shots, so I wanted to be on this one for you. Same question, Tavia. Fiber and the body, your body, the world body, whichever body you want to talk about, which whatever you're thinking about in terms of like connection. When you're working with fiber. And also I know you often speak about the history of craft and like women's work, quote unquote.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I really spent a lot of time thinking about while working on this was just the status of decorative arts, which is, I think, some women's work, particularly embroidery, has sort of lumped into, and this kind of feeling that it's somehow shallow, that it's just pretty. I think at some point during the modernist movement, they just decided the word beautiful was, anathema, like can't use that. And I think it had a lot to do with denigrating decoration. And I think that what the decorative arts do really well, particularly if you're a person who really likes to study history, is they mark each era. And they really communicate the values of that era. So for example, you can look at the clothes of the Pilgrims and you can instantly like, oh, these are some really austere, stoic people. You get this kind of, there's a conservatism about women's bodies where they're covering them. But then also if you look at like Paris and the 17th, 16th century, you'll notice that it's really all about ornate gold and filigree and Baroque and breasts pressed up and like right out at your face, and so I think that fashion really communicates. It does a lot of the legwork, most of the legwork, really. I mean, if we didn't have decoration and aesthetics, if you go back far enough in history, it's all decorative. There's no like highbrow conceptual art in the way that it is considered now. It's all a form of imparting value by adding decoration to either indicate a moment that was of value, an object that's of value. It's a way to mark both a person as important or an object as important. And so what I was really thinking about with this work isn't so much a body directly, though fashion definitely, but more I was thinking about the architectural landscape and just how urban environments are sort of like these palimpsests. And when you excavate a historical site, you're really digging on through these layers and those little bits of strand. If they find fibers, which is very, very rare, it just says so much about the different cultures. And again, these cultures don't exist in a bubble. They're built from the remnants of the one that came before it. And so there is this like natural progression. I think if you look at clothing, from the 50s and then contemporary clothing, it can be very dissonant, and you're like, how did we get here? But if you look at every era, and then even if you look at them by decade, it can feel very dissonant. Like the 70s is so different than the 80s, but it's curated to seem that way. If you actually live through the evolution of a time period, it's all very subtle. You know, every line of clothing that the fashion weeks put out is built upon like what was in last season. One of the things that I really got when I was living in New York, I went to some night classes at FIT, and I went to a fashion forecasting class, and they were talking about how nobody throws away what they bought last season. Even really rich people, you're going to spend $3,000 on a dress. You are not throwing it away 6 months later. So essentially, like even the really wealthy will only throw away something that's a couple years old, you know? So every new piece that you acquire has to work in conjunction with the ones you already have in your collection, in your closet. And so that's sort of how it builds gradually. So when I work with this material and I do these color shifts, I have to think about contrast versus continuity, and how do I make these different epochs distinctive, but also work in relation with what's already present, and so that they have a dialogue that doesn't feel in conflict. And so I think the fluidity of time and the traces that it leaves and how we analyze the past, and then the role of decoration in that whole process is something that I find really valuable.
Yeah. And while you were talking, I was just thinking like, yeah, stuff like architecture can be transformed so that original structure, only maybe minimal parts of it decades later or 100 years later could possibly be intact, but a piece of clothing gets replaced, but that original piece of clothing, if it survives, is in its original state usually. So it's these like isolated little snapshots of time versus an art like architecture that is transformed over the face of it and no longer visible usually.
Yeah, I think another thing that is interesting to think about when you're thinking about the fibers and the textiles that survive. I was reading, what was it? Not the Textile Reader. Oh, it's The New Politics of the Handmade. It's a great book. Highly recommend it. And it's about textile arts. And it was talking about, or maybe it was the Textile Reader. I don't know. I've been reading too much. But it was talking about how the things that survive aren't necessarily reflective of what that culture or era looked like, because if you wear something all the time, obviously it's going to wear out and it's not going to be preserved. And a lot of times the things that survive are either not loved very much, they're not worn, they're not used as much, or it's just sort of happenstance. You know, if something's kept in a trunk in somebody's house, if you've ever walked into one of those old homes where you're like, wow, this house has not changed since 1972. And my friends just bought a house like that. And I'm like, wow, this lady has carpets in her bathroom. She has a little, like, this is the house that time forgot. And a lot of times the things that survive, we base our entire concept about the past around the pieces that survive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those pieces were reflective of the overall prominent themes or interests. That just means that that's what we have access to. And so that's our best guess at the past. And so the past becomes this kind of muted, fragmented idea of the past that we then have to extrapolate and infer. And it's a best guess, you know, we just don't really know. Even with a million photos, because I document my work, you lose something from a physical object to documentation. And so even though I capture images, there is a degradation that happens over time, inevitably, because the piece is constantly in flux, and any kind of supplementary data is going to be somewhat insufficient to fully articulate its existence in that moment in time.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in a minute?
Yeah.
Quickly, you know, lace is a great example of something, you know, akin to what you're talking about, in the sense that it is such a labor intensive process, but they started making machine lace in the 1700s. You know, there were sort of mechanical machines, and so one of the challenges with lace history is the ephemerality of the materials. and also the fact that people repurposed and reused and readapted and combined handmade lace with machine lace, and did all kinds of things so you can identify certain things. But one of the things that there are extraordinary objects, right, that were sort of for royalty or something like that. But in the sort of more mundane merchant class, if you will, if you're talking about kind of mid lace period, where people are doing all kinds of combinations of things and sort of recombining and repurposing. Yeah, and I think that's it was both a precious material. I think one of the things that's interesting about lace is it was both a precious material and also a very utilitarian material, right? You could adorn anything with these threads. You could adorn aprons, which is what happened with this piece. I became obsessed with these these adorned aprons, and it could be Napoleon's wife's lace dress that apparently took 36 women each 9 months to make, something like that, right? So it can be this extraordinary thing. So I think that's really interesting. That's a complexity in the daily use of objects. I'm really interested in sort of the life of objects and how they communicate their life to us over time and through history and stuff like that. And then just quickly wanted to say about craft. I mean, clearly I'm not hiding the craft, I'm not transforming the craft here. I sort of am interested in, like Ruth said, I'm not interested in it being a hierarchy. I'm interested in the visibility of the craft being part of it. That visibility is really important to me. So it's kind of a stance in the work in some sense, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
The monumentality being given to craft work, essentially, or what's considered craft work.
Yeah, not sort of using craft in service of something else, but using the craft itself as a language, as an aesthetic and conceptual language that both retains its own autonomy as a craft object and also can speak to, what might be considered, more conceptual ideas. So I think it can do both. I think the sort of I don't know. I'm interested in that, right? The way that materials can communicate on multiple levels in that way.
Yeah. Awesome. I included just some installation shots. We're getting kind of close to the end, so I'm gonna go forward a bit, but just so you guys can see these individual works that we've been talking about in relation to one another in installation view, and get a sense of like how these works interact with the viewer's body. And so this piece in the middle was the one that we saw the inside of with all of the hanging garments. This is a couple detail shots of Manju's piece. And this is kind of what I was mentioning before, where there's multiple viewpoints because of the way the space is installed, where on this side we have Lillian's piece behind Manju's, and it gives you this very like pastoral sense of the installation and the creatures. So it almost reads like a dance, more like a dance from this view. And then if you walked around the other side of it, we have Susan Luss's installation across the way that has these very intense, powerful red strokes and brown strokes, and is this fabric piece that's kind of billowing out toward you. There's some other materials installed around it, but from this view, it seems much more vicious. So it's just an interesting install that's happening at Ice Cream Social, that all of these works get to benefit from one another in this way. And I just want to throw in this maquette. So Manju actually has experience previous to her art practice working in theater design. Maybe Manju, would you want to speak quickly about how that work kind of plays into your current work with installations and smaller scale pieces?
I think that it was kind of the way I learned to build objects, really in a professional way, was making them for the stage and to plan them. So like when I was thinking about what I wanted to do for Ice Cream Social, like I didn't really know what this environment would become, but I indicated it that there would be multiple levels and there would be some eggs and some green stuff, and then translating it larger, it became a lot more details and stuff. But I think it gave you enough of an insight to understand where I was going to go. But, you know, I think you already saw how I used material. So I hope you had enough confidence to say like, okay, it'll be cool, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It was fun to create that. So
Cool. And then this is a view of Ruth's piece. Again, pretty hard to photograph, but I tried my best. But so that you get a sense once you're under and kind of within this galaxy of forms on either side of the fence, what it feels like. And they kind of, it's felt, so they're lightweight, and they kind of like move a little bit with, with the draft. So it's this, like I said, it's kind of like this little galaxy that you're within, and they kind of respond to you moving within their space a bit. Ruth, is there anything you want to mention about your thoughts when you were installing? Because I know this is different than when you usually install this piece.
Yeah, I think actually it's actually incredibly fun to have such a different space to install it in that I would never think I would have had this opportunity. So it was really interesting having that wire cage in the middle and thinking about seeing through it and putting things on both sides and kind of just going in, not really with a plan. I just had all my objects and it's just going to start hanging and see what relationships formed. So I think it is really about being there and walking through the piece. I think that's the only way to really experience it. It's like totally impossible to photograph, especially because those things start to spin. So you can't even actually get any shots of it.
I think I mentioned to you at sunset, they make very funky little shadows on the back wall. It looks like a little Tim Burton set or something.
Yeah, I think somebody had said that to me. They're like, oh, they look like little toys and ornaments. And I like that idea too. I mean, that wasn't what I was thinking about, but yeah, it has that playful, I like that playful side to it, of course, as well.
Yeah, the tassels help too. Cool. And then I included some previous works by Tavia that just showcase the spectrum of installation methods that you kind of touched on before, where the pieces are very responsive to the site. Let me see, this one is like, so was this, there's some of this blue in the terrarium rendition of this piece. Is this a very early stage of growth?
Yeah, that's one of the first versions. I think that's the first like official version. And like I had a version for like a studio night that was a little bit rougher than this, but this was the first one that I really documented in a formal way. Actually, no, this is the second one because there was a gallery exhibit prior to that. But you can see it's still very landscape iconography inspired, and very bright, very craft store, very unabashed craft store. I think the pom-poms really had, so like some people had very negative reactions to the pom-poms, but like they were really quick. And I think one of the things that's really a struggle as a person who wants to work in installation art and a person who wants to work in embroidery is how do you make a very slow process very large very quickly?
Yeah.
And I think that some of the things like the pom-poms were sort of my accommodation to that. But the other way to do that is to just work on the same piece for a very long period of time and never throw away your time. And so in a way, what I'm doing with these is holding on to my time and allowing my time to build upon itself rather than getting rid of it and starting a fresh piece. I allow the labor to compound and it becomes detailed that way.
Yeah. So in this newest rendition, I think most of the white is the newest, right?
Yeah, the white is, it might have one more iteration where white material is being added, but it's coming to a close of the white era. It's starting to, usually it doesn't have to be like a full takeover. I don't think that's even really feasible. So it really becomes like a matter of like threshold. And like at this point, white is dominant, but it doesn't feel like it's like fully enveloped the piece the way, like if you saw the one that I had originally where it was the same piece in different colorways, you can tell how even though you can still see bits of green or pink through it, it still reads as a single era. And so with this one, it's not quite at threshold yet, but it's getting really close. The next iteration is going to be largely gold work, which haven't figured out completely how that's going to work since it's so detailed and nuanced. It's like hard to gain scale. So that's probably an era that will grow very, very slowly.
Yeah, makes sense. And then I think I'm gonna just give a quick view of these beautiful little wool drawings, because I do want to get to questions before we end. I included these guys just because, oops, the other way. So in general, we've kind of already touched on ideas of loss and mourning, or decay, which are all present, I think, in your work, at least the pieces that are in Terrarium. But I also got like ceremonial undertones in much of your work. So like for Tavia, there's this sense that like there's somewhat of a schedule, right? Like a natural seasonal thing happening. I included these nice little detail shots, but oh, hold on. So this was touching on some other things that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but definitely in Patricia's work, there's this sense of ceremony and leaning on symbols that could reference, like you were mentioning, votives or amulets of sorts. So I feel like, and oh, I think I have some images of, yeah, like these pieces, these former pieces of yours, Ruth, definitely felt ceremonial, like these gatherings of things that feel like they're important to a person or to a people, and they're assembled in this way that frames them and gathers them together for thought. And so I was thinking about a lot of the work that came in for this show. The open call was for the theme of growth and new beginnings, but I think a lot of the artists who applied were speaking about history. So it was like this reverse way of thinking about growth, where everyone was kind of insisting with their work that a steady ground is necessary first, a reflection on history and a reliance on history, whether that be personal or evolutionary or whatever mode we're talking about, that a reliance and insistence of history on history is important for growth. And so so there's quite a bit of like ceremonial tones throughout, I think, the whole show, because ceremonies are built throughout history and rely on tradition. It's an event that accentuates history and tradition of a people, right? So I thought I'd include some of these pieces that marked those undertones that are throughout. I also got that sense from this piece of yours, Manju, but maybe I was totally wrong. It has, similar to Tavia, this sense of like seasonality.
I mean, I think artists are culture makers, right?
Yeah.
Especially in today's society where we are less reliant and accepting of traditions from religion or from cultural things, that we're moving away from just blindly accepting those or taking them in. Artists are kind of filling that void in some way. In by creating new images and new things. I mean, it's not random that eggs and chickens are used in the spring as images for Passover and Easter. Right? Those are symbols of rebirth and other things. But I think that those, and in this piece I have wheat and eggs. And ships and chickens, and yeah, there feels like it's like a time and a passage of things coming and going again.
Okay, well, we're a little beyond time, so I'm gonna unshare. And then I'm just gonna check the chat. If anyone had questions, you can add them in, but I'm gonna let our artists go if there aren't any questions. And I'm also gonna allow everyone to unmute and turn their camera on if anyone wants to say their question themselves. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but I'll give it a couple minutes.
I'd just like to thank everyone for coming and listening to us, and to Ice Cream Social. This is such a wonderful new venue, and you've been just incredibly supportive of us as artists, and it's a great environment to play and expand and grow more pieces. Very exciting.
Yes, lots of play. There was lots of trust involved in some of these proposals, but we have the space to do it. And I've never been able to install on a cage wall. So I was just like, let's have at it.
Super fun, yeah.
Yeah, we were thinking of the initial plan was for this show to be the only show in the cage space. And then we would build out a regular drywall gallery on the floor, but I don't know. The cage kind of grew on everybody, so we might just leave it.
It is really unique. It was a great, sorry, not the cat, of course, is walking across. But yeah, I ditto everything that Manju said. It's been a really great experience.
Yeah, me too.
I'm so glad.
Sure.
And I hope if people have questions, sometimes questions are the most fun.
Yeah. Somebody has questions, unless we were just so eloquent and clear, I guess. I don't know. Well, let's give a moment of plugs, because I know you guys have some stuff going up. Everybody's pretty busy on this panel. So let's just go around so people know what's happening in your studios and they can go visit. There's no options in chat to post questions to everyone. No, I can see the chat. So if anyone puts a question in the chat, I can see it, or you can also unmute yourself and put your video on if you'd like to say the question yourself. But yeah, in the meantime, let's go around. So, I see the top of Tavia's head. Tavia, do you have anything happening?
Actually, I'm wrapping up a bunch of stuff and waiting on a few proposals to clear. So I don't want to promote them quite yet because they're not fully solid. I have work up in Columbus, Ohio still. It's coming down at the end of this month too. It's at Manifest Gallery. It's a different body of work. That's mostly just like gold work, embroidery, and wire, in a purely it's an exhibit called Ornamental. So
Cool.
it's fully embracing
Stand by it.
Yes. But yeah, I'll be posting new events up on my website in the next month, but I don't want to plug them too soon because they're still in the works.
Yeah, that makes sense. And all of our artists up here are on Instagram and have websites. The websites are linked through Ice Cream Social's event page. So you should subscribe, follow, do whatever you can to be on their on their updates list. Ruth, what do you have in the pipeline?
Coming up, not anything right now. In the summer, I will be installing this piece in a larger space, as well as some other big felt installations at the Brattleboro Museum in Vermont, which should be really fun. And then I'm also doing an outdoor installation in the Queen's Botanical Garden in summer as well. We'll see how all of that plays together. It's all at the same time. And then in the fall, I'll be there's a window in Dumbo, the main window. I'll be doing a big installation in that window in the fall. So those are some of the bigger things.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Manju, what do you have?
I am going to be in a show called Brooklyn Utopias at the Old Stone House in Park Slope, Brooklyn, right on the edge of Gowanus neighborhood. And I have a few sculptures in that show. I'm going to be at BWAC, Brooklyn Waterfront Artists Coalition.
It's a mouthful.
It is. I'm trying to remember what it's called. And that's in Red Hook. It's this really incredible space that was, I think, a tobacco warehouse, but it's really right on the water in Red Hook. So you feel like you're in another place and time. Yeah. So
Cool.
I guess, yeah. A couple pieces of there. And I will be in Among Friends, a great organization, a great group show organized by some friends of mine. Which we
too. I'll see you there. And
you're gonna be there. Oh, good.
Yeah.
You'll be there too. I'll have my eyes on your pieces, so we'll all be together. So that's a super fun one coming up too.
Cool, cool. Patricia, I know you've got a full list coming.
I have a solo show, which is a kind of a different iteration with some new monumental works coming up Saturday, opening at the Jane Street Art Center in Saugerties, New York. So Saturday from 4 to 7 is the opening. I will be up there. I'm doing a bunch of workshops, a sewing circle, a dyes and pigments workshop, and we are going to have Elena Canigilou, who's one of the co-founders of Brooklyn Lace Guild and works in the textile, one of the textile centers at the Met, going to come up, and we do like a day of talking about lace. And so there's some fun events on that. So that's happening on Saturday. I'm currently in an exhibition at the Clemente Center, curated by Anna Shukelu and Yasmin Abdallah, which closes on Saturday. So Saturday is the last day. I have an installation work in that show. And I'm also in the Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance Women in the Heights show, which is an amazing group of uptown women artists. And the artist talk is on Tuesday evening. A bunch of other things, but that's enough for now.
And Patricia, just so everybody knows, also runs our sister art space in Portchester, and also has a show up currently in that space. It's like a block away from the train station, super walkable. And so she's starting up programming there for the season, and she runs Crit Lab, which is an alternate MFA program out of that space. I'm putting it in the chat for anyone who's interested.
Thank you so much. Out of me. The
semester just started though, so maybe
we're sort of we're full in.
Right. Okay.
Taking artists to Italy in June. We're going to the Biennale and to a residency in the Alps. That's a Crit Lab program. And then the new sessions will start in September. But the Intimacies show is really beautiful. It's this amazing, I can't remember now how many artists are in the show. A lot of artists, but it's a small work show curated by myself and Gabby Collins Fernandez. It's really a beautiful show. So yeah, we're one block from the train and open by appointment, and probably going to extend it and do another event, because our opening that Jen was at was such a, people were so excited. We feel like we want more. We just haven't had enough of one another. So yeah, so that's great. Anybody wants to come, just reach out to me. That would be awesome.
Yeah, Portchester is booming. So if anyone wants to come do a visit, we can link up to visit both spaces. We have 2 more virtual panels coming up just like this. April 6th and April 16th. I might be wrong on that, but it's all on the website. And then we have one in-person performance art piece by 2 other artists who are in the show, Theo Trotter and Susan Luss. We'll be doing a performance piece in the space, transforming one another's works. All of that information is also on the site. All of the RSVP forms are live, so you can just browse through and RSVP to whichever event at this time that you want to go to. This recording will be linked on our website under this event page. So for anyone who wants to rewatch or share it, it'll be accessible there. So I just want to say thank you to our audience members and mostly to our panel artists for spending this evening with us, even though we are grossly over time. Thank you guys. All right.
Thanks so much.
So, we're going to say our goodbyes, and hopefully we'll see some people at Ice Cream Social.
Take care.
Thank you.
You guys.
It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.